When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father, Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, "No, he is to be called John." They said to her, "There is no one among your relatives who has that name." Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment he wrote, "His name is John." Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbors were filled with awe, and throughout the hill country of Judea people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him.
Today's story from the Gospel of Luke is full of miracles and unexpected twists, reminding us how God intervenes in our lives. At the center of this story is an elderly couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, whose lives were turned upside down by God's grace. Think about it. Zechariah, a priest and a man of prayer, loses his speech because he didn't trust the angel bringing news of his son's birth. How could this happen? A priest who doubts. It shows that even the most devout among us can have moments of weakness. Zechariah didn't trust God's promise and was reprimanded. But on the day of John's circumcision, when he confirmed his son's name, his speech was restored. God showed grace, not just to him, but to all of us. Do we, like Zechariah, sometimes doubt? Do we look at our problems and think they are too big even for God? Or, like Zechariah and Elizabeth's neighbors, are we amazed by God's miracles but afraid to believe in them? Do we prefer to return to our small, safe worlds instead of trusting that God works in mighty ways? Let's consider the name John, which translated from Hebrew means God has shown grace. This name was not chosen by accident. God shows grace not only to Zechariah and Elizabeth. This symbolically highlighted name tells us that grace has been given to each of us, every day, in the smallest details of our lives. Can we see it? Do we notice God's miracles in our lives? Or do we look with skepticism like the neighbors? Let's take an example from Abraham, who believed in God's promises, even though they seemed improbable. In the 15th chapter of Genesis we read, "And Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness." Do we have the courage to believe that God has a plan for us, even when everything seems to go against us? Let's be honest. How often do we laugh at ideas that seem crazy but are from God? Like Noah, building the ark in the desert, when everyone around thought he had lost his mind. Yet he was right, because he trusted God. We are also called to such courage, to the madness of faith that may seem foolish to the world. Remember Paul's words from the 1st chapter of the letter to the Romans, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes." Do we have the courage to step out of our comfort zone, trust God, and proclaim His miracles, even when the world looks at us with disbelief? God showed grace to Zechariah and Elizabeth, but also to each of us. Do we have the courage to see this grace, accept it, and live by it every day? Or do we prefer to be like those neighbors who, surprised and uncertain, return to their small matters? Today, I encourage you to look at your life through the eyes of faith. See God's actions. Notice His grace that surrounds you. Have the courage to believe that God is with you, that His hand guides you every day. Like John the Baptist, be witnesses of God's love and power in a world full of doubt. Let your faith be a source of joy and peace that brings blessings to you and everyone around you. May God bless us all.